Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Bulletproof Dental Practice Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Peter Boulden, and Monsieur Perrin DesPortes, because that's a French name, actually, but he grew up in South Carolina, so it is actually just Perrin DesPortes, right? Is that how you say it?
No, Perrin DesPortes. It would just be Perrin DesPortes.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Perrin DesPortes. That's right.
So good to have you here, Perrin. We have been a long-time fan of Tusk Partners and your podcast, and Pete sends me all your podcasts, and I'm just anxious to get to know you better and learn what you guys bring to dentistry.
Thanks, Craig and Peter. I appreciate y'all having me on today. It's a real honor. This ought to be a lot of fun. I'm very I hold your podcast in high admiration too, and the followers that y'all have built. So this ought to be fun.
Thank you for that.
You know, it may be a lot higher and a lot more of them by now, Perrin, but I've got a 6'5" tag along. He just keeps showing up in the Zoom room every time. Like, oh, another podcast?
Yeah. I actually wasn't invited to this one, but I just figured 3:30 on a Friday. Maybe I'll just pop into our Zoom channel and boom, look at this. We have one
Peter's
going.
Got nothing going on. He's probably talking on Zoom anyway. I'll just join in his sandbox for a little bit, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
But
might
Perrin,
even crash your date night with your wife next week, Pete. Just me, you, and her. Just hang out, go some pizza.
In all actuality, I mean, there are a lot of good dental podcasts, and there's some that you're kind of like, it's kind of entry level, and I don't want to listen to this. But y'all's, I send them to Craig because it's truly like y'all have the chops to be talking about it, and we always kind of say this to each other, like, and some good takeaways. And just when you think you've got something figured out, you hear someone like you and Kevin Cumbus, I guess, or co-founders of Tusk. You hear you guys discuss things, and you're like, wow, I never thought of X, Y, and Z. So it's just really, I was really glad to see that you guys launched a podcast because number one, you're adding so much value to a space that is, as Craig and I are leading people and kind of having, either masterminds or summits, it's the wild, wild west for a lot of us. Like we don't know because we haven't been there before. And so having you guys kind of talk about it is, and being an advocate on our side is really cool. So big fan.
Thanks for saying that. I really appreciate it. The podcast for us was one of our initiatives for 2020.
Little did you think it was going to be as much work as it was, Perrin?
So yeah, we knew it was going to be a heavy lift. I host most of them. And the recordings are usually pretty fun. And thankfully I've got a digital marketing coordinator that polishes them up and distributes them and everything like that. And,
nice.
And that's a huge, I think, benefit to us because I can just focus on the content. And I think if you know your audience well enough and you know who you're shooting to be in your audience, crafting the content that is bite-sized chunks and deliverables that they can digest at least and kind of conceptualize is really key without adding a lot of fluff to it. So it has been a heavy lift, but it's also been a little bit of fun.
It's fun. No, for sure. It's just like, I kind of started it, even before the days of, Craig joined it later. And then I said, I'm going to start a podcast. And it was like, oh my God, all these steps. And it's, and so it's a daunting thing, but you're right. It's everything, worth anything takes hard work. And so it has been fun. And honestly, my relationship with Craig is, as a friendship has kind of blossomed. So there you go, Craig. There's my warm fuzzy for the day. That's the only one we're going to get.
Yeah. I mean, I remember like being flown around to different places to lecture. Like I remember lecturing in Versailles, Ohio, like hopping on 2 different planes and driving an hour, like for a 1-hour lecture. And I'm like, there's gotta be a better way to help the profession and to spread this without, being physically there. And I just want to improve the profession in the fashion that I could. So if we have this venue, why not? I mean, people are using this as net time. They're driving to work, they're listening, and we can help people. And Peter and I have skinned our knees and fell down so many times. It kills me that this information would die on the vine. So I want to get it out. And I'm sure that's your mission as well. If you don't mind, just for the listeners that don't know, how was Tusk Partners found, and who are the people, and also why Tusk? I see the big elephant behind your head. I'm just curious about that as well.
Yeah, so I'll give you the quick background on it. So I'm one of 3 co-founders of the business. My 2 co-founding partners are Kevin Cumbus, who you mentioned before, and Kevin handles a lot of our sell-side advisory M&A side of the business. And then Diwakar Sinha is our 3rd co-founding partner. And Diwakar and I work predominantly in our consulting side of our business. And, my background specifically, real briefly, is that I spent 15 years running 3 different businesses for Patterson, and saw a lot of the customers, the clients we worked with, that were entrepreneurs who happened to be dentists starting to grow a group practice. Most of them, were not satisfied, I guess, with just owning one practice. They wanted to own more than one. And when you see enough of them do it and they all stub their toe doing the same thing, making the same mistakes, running into the same challenges and everything, you start to see a little bit of an opportunity there. And DeWalker is a career healthcare banker, was most recently VP of sales for a bank out of Pasadena called East West Bank. And East West was the arguably preeminent lender in the group practice space. And that's a different context from a lending standpoint than your traditional, what you might call rate and term lender that's going to loan money to the first dentist to start his or her practice or to buy his or her first practice. So growth capital and just, starting or acquiring your first practice are different. And DeWalker saw the same thing that I saw from a banking lens. He and I had gotten to know one another when we both lived in the New York, New Jersey market, both ended up moving to Charlotte about the same time. And Kevin Cumbus, our third co-founding partner, is a recovering investment banker off of Wall Street. So has investment banking and valuation background, worked for a company called the McGill Hill Group here in Charlotte that does a lot of white glove service for dentists, one of which is practice valuations. And when a company called Heartland Dental started buying up a lot of practices they had listed for sale, Kevin saw the light bulb, all of a sudden go off in his head that was, the enterprise level DSOs look at valuation like investment banking. That meets with some of my background. So Kevin DeWalker and I all live in Charlotte, and we're all, sitting around the campfire multiple times together saying, somebody really ought to start a business that would help entrepreneurial dentists grow and sell their group practice. Why isn't anybody doing that? And if you repeat that refrain to yourself often enough, you're like, well, why don't we do that? We've got the background, we've got the experience to do it. We all understand growth strategy for business. None of us are clinical dentists, obviously, but that's not what group practice is necessarily about from a leadership context. It is the business that is dentistry, but the reasons that group practices fail is not because they have a bunch of bad dentists doing bad clinical work. It's usually because they're overburdened with debt. They can't hire and fire appropriately. They can't attract associates. Amen. They can't grow the business, and they have irrational expectations upon exit. So we decided to start a business that would help entrepreneurial dentists start, grow, and ultimately sell their group practice or DSO. And that business has become Tusk. And the brand, if you will, I'll just conclude the thought on this. When we were putting the business together, we wanted it to be a brand. We didn't want it to be DesPortes Sinha Cumbus LLC. As Kevin likes to say, the URL was available, but that wasn't what we were going to call our business. We really wanted it to be a one-syllable word, and we really wanted to repurpose the URL. And so we brainstormed everything, and nothing stuck, or everything was always taken. And so Kevin's on spring break with his wife and young kids going up to New York, and the first place they go is the Natural History Museum on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And as soon as you walk in, if you've ever been
woolly mammoth,
walk through the front doors, and the first thing you see is that huge mastodon with the 2 tusks coming out, and literally you walk right into it. And Kevin was like, "Oh, bleep, tusk, it's a tooth. The elephant's the wisest beast in the field, and it lives forever, and it can stomp the hell out of anything smaller than it. It's perfect." So that's we were awesome. Like, that's the brand for the business. And then we found that Tusk.com is actually a women's leather clothing store up in New York, and they weren't willing to part ways with the URL. So we used Tusk, but we got Tusk-partners.com as the website. So that's
very cool. Hey, what year was DeWalker join? What year was this, and what year did DeWalker join you? Because I remember hearing him speak, God, a long time ago, like some like almost like a venture capital type seminar. I can't remember what it was. It was 6 years ago. Yeah.
So we started formulating the idea for the business in about 2016, decided, really put pen to paper, figure out how we're going to launch it and what we're going to do in late 16. And then I left Patterson in January of 17. I think DeWalker left East West in probably about November of 16. So call it late 16, early 17 is when the business kind of came out of the ground, I guess.
Because DeWalker was actually lecturing prior to Tusk, correct? He was getting up on stage and stuff like that, or was that post Tusk that I saw him?
I think he did do a number of presentations for a lot of the different conferences around. I mean, he had a pretty prominent role with East West, and as the group practice movement was kind of getting going, a lot of people were running into those challenges around, securing committed debt funds for growth without a fragmented capital structure. And that was something.
Can you just say what that is in English real quick, just so the dentist that just heard that, because that was not English.
Okay. So I have the blessing and the curse of working with a couple of recovering healthcare bankers, and sometimes I go into bankingese. But so what happens is, if you're going to build a 10 location group or something like that, and you've got 2 or 3 locations that you presently own, a typical entrepreneur will say, well, I'm going to buy my first couple, and I'll use a committed lender like a Bank of America or something like that, Wells Fargo or any of those that are great at low cost of funds. But they all have a ceiling because, or a cap on what they're going to lend, because they're lending money to dentists thinking that that dentist is going to be working in that business 3 to 4 to 5 days a week. It's a really low credit risk. So, once a dentist moves from being a practicing dentist to being more of an entrepreneur and a CEO, and they're still personally guaranteeing the loans, but they're not working in those businesses full time, then that's a little bit of a different underwriting criteria, and it's a different risk profile from a lender. So what happens is the initial bank may limit the funds they can borrow up to a certain amount, like say $2 million of loan exposure, but that's not going to get the founder to 10 locations, right? So they go to bank number 2 and say, hey, will you loan me money to buy this location I've got my eye on? And the second bank says, yeah, absolutely. We'll collateralize that location. We'll loan you money to buy that one or maybe one more. And that's subordinated debt, which means it carries a higher interest rate. It usually carries more confiscatory prepayment penalties.
Confiscatory, write that one down, Pete. I'm using that one.
Yeah, that's going to be my new word.
Yeah. So what you end up
be able
with,
to pronounce it first.
What you end up with is a 6-location group funded by 3 different lenders,
all subordinated,
all at different rates and different prepayment structures. And ultimately, it's like you run out of rope. And that happens to everybody a lot. We call that hitting the debt funding wall. And it's not to point a bad finger at banks. Banks are great. They love lending money to dentists. And if you communicate with them up front and you get with the right lender and the right structure, then it can be a wonderful relationship. But when you don't communicate what your intentions are and the bank has to react to that, then it doesn't really work out too well in the long run. So
yeah, prepayment penalties to get all the subordinated debt, and you have to unwind it and you get shafted.
Well, so what happens is, you ultimately end up running out of rope, and you come to a group like us or maybe some others to say, look, can you find me a lender that will help me realize my vision? I need an additional $2 to $3 million to execute my growth strategy. Here's my business plan. This is what I want to do. And you're usually looking at either a lower middle market lending group that's not what you might call a retail banker. It's still traditional senior debt. It's not mezzanine capital or anything like that. But it's a lender that says, we're going to recap your business and the $2 million in total debt that you have. We're going to take out all those other banks, and we're going to commit to you an additional $2 million of capital to execute your growth strategy, as long as you continue to operate the business within the following leverage and liquidity ratios. So if you know how the game is played and what the bank is expecting of you, then using their money to execute your growth strategy is a wonderful thing, because it's like having conditional pre-approval. You can, in that structure that I just named, you can acquire practices every bit as quickly as a private equity group could, which is to say, close within 30 days if you want.
Let's,
Perrin,
wait, hold on, Craig.
Yeah, we'll
Let's get into the structure for a second. So, Perrin, before we hit record, you had a great idea, and I am one of structure as probably to a fault, and I think you talked about the three biggest kind of problems that are facing the industry from who you kind of advise, and they were attracting and retaining top talent, whether that's team or associate dentists. The second was the debt funding wall, I believe you called it.
Yep.
And the third one would be the founder's dilemma. And I think that's a great kind of podcast thing. And I'd like to go through and unpack those in that order because they're pretty diverse in their topic. And so can we I know you just talked about some of the debt, which I was sitting here with kind of anxiety. I was breaking out into hives because I wanted to rewind back to the structure where we originally kind of talked about. So let's go back if we can, let's go back in that order, because I think Craig, I think you said maybe even change the order we go in. Maybe the debt the founder's dilemma being kind of the second thing because it flows into the debt.
The running out of rope.
We got hot and heavy there for a second during the debt, but I want to kind of keep it where everyone kind of can follow I can follow the bouncing ball.
Yeah. Yes. So you want to take founder's dilemma first usually?
No, let's do retaining top talent.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
That was great.
We get that a lot, especially in, that's a question we get with a lot in the summits. And we get that question a lot in even coaching and masterminding is like, how do you find, like, what's the best way to get an associate, whether, and so I want you to kind of, unpack what you've discovered as the answers, so to speak. Yeah.
So, associate turnover is the number one problem in all group practices, and it doesn't matter if you're 2 locations or you're 1,002, right? I mean, it's rampant everywhere. So it's not unique to any one set or one type of business. Mm-hmm. And I think about this from a couple of different contexts. One, when we're talking about associates, I think about it holistically from a recruiting, onboarding, and development standpoint. Okay. And I'll unpack all of that, and then I'll tell you what we think some of the keys are to it. So first things first, recruiting. What makes you different than any other group practice I'm interviewing with? All right. What's your why? What's your secret sauce? What's different about you? And don't tell me about clinical compensation rate, because compensation is a function of rate and number of patients in the chair. So you can pay me 50% of collections, and if you can't generate but 3 or 4 patients for me to work on each day, here's the news flash: I'm not going to make any money. All right.
So hallelujah. I say that all the time. Hallelujah for saying it. So
compensation.
You'll get in a bidding war, by the way, with a couple points, and the practice doesn't generate any money. So to your point,
it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Congratulations. You have 80% of your collections, but you have 3 patients a week.
Yeah, exactly. So, compensation rate ain't it. So it's, you want to create, it's the whole Simon Sinek thing, people who believe what you believe. You want to find somebody that wants to be part of what you're building, and that's what you want to communicate from a recruiting standpoint. But I'll tell you the second thing about recruiting. Well, there are 2 things that I think are key in recruiting. One is usually a pathway to equity. All right. So equity and ownership have a tremendous amount of benefits from an employee engagement standpoint, from a commitment standpoint, and from a longevity standpoint. And I'll go through all that in just a second. The second piece about recruiting, though, is that human beings don't react well to uncertainty. All right. Especially if you think about going through dental school, it was compartmentalized. Everything was framed in. There's a curriculum and a pathway, and you're developing a skill set, and it's all laid out in front of you. And people know when, final exams are and practicals and all that kind of stuff. So they're used to seeing some semblance of a finish line. So you recruit me as an associate, and I agree to come work for you. And then you give me a treatment room and a lab coat and some PPE and stuff, and say, all right, Perrin, have at it. I'm like, wait, what? I just got dropped in where? What's going on here? I want to know, if I'm an associate, I want to know what it's going to be like. I want to know what my first month, 2 months, 3 months is going to be like. So when you lay out an onboarding process, for me, I get to drink the company Kool-Aid. Okay. I get to understand your culture. I get to understand fit. I get to understand what we're doing and what my role in it is. Your point of starting the employee engagement process is on day one. And that really needs to be laid out to people so that they can understand what's going to be expected of them in the first period of time, whatever that is, 30 days, 90 days, or some period in between. And then beyond that, especially if I'm a young dentist coming out of residency and, haven't had a clinical mentor, I've got the skill set that I got coming out of dental school pretty much, but what are you going to do to make me a better dentist? How am I going to get better under your leadership? I mean, the thing that I used to share with people going back to the corporate America days, with Patterson is that, don't take your first job based on the money. Take your first job based on who your mentor is going to be and what you can learn from that person. You got 30 or 40 years to make a truckload of cash. If you're good at what you do, you're going to make a lot of money. But what you want to learn quickly and early on is the mistakes that you can minimize or not make that everybody else is. And that's usually from a mentorship and a development standpoint. So if you're talking about recruiting, solve for the onboarding and development piece and lay it out so that somebody can see it in front of them when they're looking at joining your team.
So like a framework, like here's how we do it, right? And it's this steps and yeah. Did you say that you recommend in that kind of, I heard you say 60 or 90 days. We have kind of and I call it a probationary period, but that's not really but it's a trial thing. We want to let's kind of date before we, you sign up. Do you recommend those in practices or not? Or do you just say, all right, sign up?
Yeah. So, I agree with you philosophically. I don't know that I would promote it as a probationary.
No, that was the wrong term. I can't remember.
Trial hire. We call it a trial hire.
Trial hire. Thank you, Craig.
So that's what we call it in my office.
Yeah, but you're evaluating that person for the same reasons. Are they going to be a good fit culturally? Can they do the dentistry you're going to ask of them? Or are they, a gunslinger or something? Just are they going to be a bad apple in the bunch at the end of the day? You want a period of time where you can evaluate them. But for them, it might vary. It might vary by business. But somewhere between 30 and 90 days of having laid out in front of them what their first couple of weeks are going to look like, how they're interfacing with all the different people in the organization. If you want to put milestones down for them, there's that thing about if you create a clear pathway, or to use your word, Peter, a framework, I can see myself in that. I also develop a degree of confidence about the business that you have, and that it's going to make me a better dentist than what I could do on my own or if I went somewhere else. And solving for that piece of certainty goes a long way of creating confidence in somebody who's evaluating you versus another business. And it's a point of differentiation, because I'm here to tell you, most group practices don't have that laid out very clearly.
That's really smart too, because I'm thinking about what you said originally about we have the warm confines of dental school, and some have more fuzzier ideas about it wasn't a warm fuzzy experience for me, but Craig, you speak pretty highly about your dental experience. But regardless, we had the guardrails. We knew the structure. We knew what was a success and a failure. We knew that, where the touchdown was, so to speak, right? You had these requirements.
The benchmarks are so key.
The benchmarks, right? And so I love how you that's a good idea, Perrin, because I think it resonates with dentists, right? Because we get indoctrinated into this, like, okay, I need a path, I need a checklist, I need to do X number of root canals, I need to do X number of crowns before I'm proficient. Maybe that should be extrapolated into the practices, right? And I don't think it's a jump through these hoops kind of thing as much as, hey, this is what I would consider a win. The founding doctor would say, this is what I would consider a great win for the first 6 months you're here. If you're doing 30, indirect restorations a month, or whatever it is, right? But at least outlaying, as opposed to, like you said, here's your lab coat, here's your, here's your room, whatever, go to work, just do good.
One of the most powerful things that I ever realized to do, and Pete, you're really fortunate in that Pete's got this pipeline because some of his partner doctors are directors for a local residency that just turns out powerhouses. So they have this pipeline of like, oh my God, you see Dr. So-and-so, that junior doctor, in 2 years, he's gonna be a rock star. So they kind of can groom these people, which is really cool because most people don't have that. We're just really going on blind dates all the time. So one thing that's really powerful is we tend to think people know what we expect of them. And we tend to believe that all dentists treat people the same exact way. And that's a source of big frustration. So one of the things I learned early on in my career, and I employed, and it's really worked out great, is you sit a dentist down who's going to be an associate and pull up a random set of x-rays and say, what are you going to do on this patient? What would you do? There's no wrong or right answer. But if a patient goes to 10 different dentists, they're going to get 10 different answers. And the guy that's going to recommend a full mouth recon for like 1 millimeter of wear may rattle the crap out of the senior doctor. So just see what they see. And it's amazing what they see and what they say. And instantly, oh shit, we've got a values and philosophical problem here. Because when you look at a successful associateship, 3 benchmarks: do good dentistry and be productive, have the same dental barometer for what should be treated and not should be treated. So you share the same values. That's number 1. Make sure the people like you. And one of the metrics is like, make sure that Google's talking about you. People are writing reviews about you. So if they mention Dr. Associate in reviews, that's a good benchmark that people are responding well to you. And third, make sure you're not, that you're a good leader and the team resonates with you. If you have those 3 factors alone, you're miles ahead. And it's very clear for an associate that you want to be productive. You want to do the dentistry that I agree with, that we're on the same page. So do this clinical, see these 3 patients and see what you tell me what you see and what you'd recommend and how you talk to the patient. And it'll be a real eye opener for you. You'll save a lot of heartache. Second, make sure patients are liking you and you Google reviews. And the third is team responding to you. Because you could have 2 of those and just be a total douchebag to your team. Mm-hmm. And the hygienist is going to be calling founder doc, be like, oh my God, doctor, new guy just told me, to shut up. And like, you have a mess on your hands.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, completely agree. It's people skills and count for a ton in this type of a healthcare environment, especially. The other thing I mentioned early on in the associate piece is equity, and I'll go ahead and just say that we are big fans of equity and a pathway to equity with a great degree of definition and clarity, not just, hey, you come work for me for 5 years and we'll take a look at that point.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I hate that. Yeah. I'm guilty of that, by the way, just because I don't have the framework built.
I am not.
Well, so, there are a bunch of different...
Once you do it once, it's easier for the next time. The first step's the hard one.
Yeah. So... if you want to have equity, if you want to have others having equity in the business, but I think, there are a bunch of different ways to solve for that conundrum when it comes to equity. And when you start talking about groups, then you also start talking about equity at a practice level versus equity at a DSO or a corporate level, and what's the difference and how does valuation. I won't go into that unless y'all want to at some point.
Perrin, isn't it funny how so many times you see, like, when people talk about equity, it's always all right, well, I have 100% and I guess I'll go to 50. And Craig and I are kind of in discussions, our mastermind, about like, it doesn't have to be a 50% block. It can be
Peter 10. And I own Amazon stock. You know what percentage of Amazon we own?
Right. But that's like that's
0.0001. So it's a chip on the table. If you're going to work as an associate and work your tail off, why not have a chip on the table? Does that mean $100,000 or $1 million or whatever? It's something. If I know I'm committed to this practice, I would like to have an equity piece, whatever I'm comfortable with. And you know what? You could always buy more over time. But the idea that people will I'm a big believer. I'm 100% under my practice, but I would love nothing more than to have equity partners. And that's something I just would love to execute. But the devil's in the details, and it's always it's tough to get through that.
Well, so let's go back to the people we're recruiting, and you mentioned Pete's got a pipeline and can attract a higher level of candidate and all that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're all interested in building successful, growing group practices, especially, are we are we just looking for the bottom of the barrel? I mean, aren't we looking for a cut above? And usually those that are a cut above have aspirations to be an owner. They have an aspiration to be, to have a seat at the table. And for lack of a better term, they have aspirations over some level of control. Now, voting control is a completely different context of the conversation. But to your point, Craig, if I own 5% of your business, I'm a partner. You know, that's on my business card. I feel like I have some influence in the overall direction of the business, even if I can't outvote you. But it's something to be said that we're building this together. And that type of a mindset gets me to take better care of patients, hopefully, like you mentioned before, gets me to take better care of the staff, be a better teammate and a leader in the business, gets me to mind the top line and the bottom line and not waste supplies and do shoddy work. So, you know, when you talk about associates, and again, you know, we talk about attracting and retaining associates because we want to minimize or limit turnover. You know, the middle piece that I didn't name is attracting, motivating, and retaining. And having an equity stake in a business is motivational beyond a shadow of a doubt. So there are ways to get to that. And I think the traditional model, you mentioned 50%, that's the solo doctor in a solo location that hires his or her first associate, and they want that person to buy them out over time. So they sell.
The problem is though, Perrin, that's like historically, that's like 95% of the ownership dialogue. So we're fighting against the current of, well, how can I afford you? You're an $8 million practice. Well, yeah, well, you can have a $400,000 investment or a $2 million investment.
Right.
The typical dialogue in partnerships has been senior doctor not wanting to invest, wanting too much money. And it's almost like,
well, here's the other rub to it. Here's another dirty little secret. So if you want to sell a significant stake, whatever significant means, and the associate in question has to go to the bank to borrow the funds, they're going to personally guarantee the loan, but your business is the backstop behind that. So again, let's go back to building a group for a second. And we're in growth mode and we're trying to get from 5 to 10 locations or more. And we're still using bank funds to do it. A committed source of bank funds, like I mentioned before, is critically important. But when a bank looks to make a loan to you, they look at what you're ultimately responsible for, and that associate's loan to buy into $500,000 worth of equity in location number 2 or something like that is going to appear when they pull your credit. And so if you're wanting to grow the business and you're using bank funds,
so it's on your balance sheet, it's on the company balance sheet, right?
You got to be mindful.
But also he's securitizing the debt as well now. He's going to be subordinate to there's that other dirty secret as well. He could wind up being, if he wants to buy a significant portion, or he or she does, they could be, have their butt on the line for the debt.
Yeah. So, you know, it's not a hard no, but it is something to be mindful of, again, depending on what type of business you're trying to build. We are big fans, and I'm just going to, I guess, be shamelessly promotional or something like that. But Kevin DeWalker and I, having worked for corporate America in our past, all were, I guess, beneficiaries of something called restricted stock units, or RSUs. And I'm not going to go waist deep into that, but RSUs are an earned equity model that corporate America uses to motivate and retain their top performing salespeople, managers, leaders, et cetera. It's not a stock option, but it's an earned equity piece, and it has a vesting schedule, which is the golden handcuffs, is what y'all would probably recognize. And the nice thing about it is, or the theory behind it, is that we're all we all have equity in the same company. We're all stewards of the company. We all mind the bottom line, and we're all interested in growing the value of our shares. And you can build the same model. We've done it for group practices where a founder may own 100% of the business. And the question for the founder is a simple one. which is, would you rather be a 100% owner of a business valued at $2 million, or would you rather be an 80% owner of a business valued at $10 million? And then you understand that it's not the percentage ownership necessarily, it's the value of the shares that you hold. And if those associates, again, recruiting associates now, if you can make a pitch to them to say, look, you can come join our group. You'll be on a pathway to partnership on day one. You will have the opportunity to earn equity through superior performance. Oh, by the way, you won't have to buy a dime's worth of it or take on any more debt to do it. You'll earn it through superior performance and above average collections in the business. That's pretty compelling to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, on a 10-year projection, if they can end up to the same finish line as what they would otherwise have by buying their own business, it's a great outcome with less risk on their behalf.
By the way, I'm just going to spitball out something here. Just as a concept, while you're talking, I thought of something. Imagine if you would, because a dentist hearing that will say like, well, why am I doing that? I'm just giving away a piece of the pie. And you have to tell the owner dentist, the founder dentist, well, no, because listen, having partners will work harder. And even though you're going to get the 80% of the $10 million business versus 100% of the 2 million. But what if there was a congruent system where each year you vest and you get a percentage of the bottom line, but you also agree to make, because the owner's dilemma is you want to make long-term profit. And the associate's like, what am I going to get paid this week? What's my percentage? So imagine if you threw in something that's consistent, or I'm sorry, collaterally decreasing the associate salary as the percentage of profit of the business goes up. So in other words, like year one, you get, 5% or whatever, you get 5% of the net profit of the business, but you agree to make 3% less on your associate salary. So you're increasing the profitability of the practice and getting a share of that. So it actually worked out to the benefit of the associate and the benefit of the organization, making it more valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to work through the math on that to make sure.
I just like the theory. Pete, what do you think of that? You think it's going off on a crazy?
Yeah, I think that's a little clunky.
But you know what I'm saying? Like Pete and I about, like, as an owner dentist, people typically will make less than an associate, but you, as a percentage of your
in the short term,
but you get an ownership piece of the bottom line. So, it's like the CEO coming on board with a smaller salary, but a greater percentage of equity. Just thinking out loud.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of things, just not to get excessively technical, but you mentioned giving away equity, and let me be really clear for all of your audience. Okay. Equity is never given away. It is either bought or it's earned. Okay. And that's a critical point, because
good distinction.
Yeah. I mean, don't anybody in the audience, all the millions of followers you guys have, don't anybody ever think about giving away equity. When I say an earned equity model, this is not socialism. It's not share and share alike. This is saying that if you achieve above some threshold of performance, the incremental dollars you get in an equity stake in the business. So if I'm the founder of it, that increases the value of my shares at a faster rate than the dilution impacts me on a percentage basis. So I think that's critical to keep in mind, because we're not talking about diluting people aggressively that took the risk to found the business, that personally guaranteed the loans, that had the sleepless nights, that got paid last to do that. That is absolutely not what you want. What you want is a committed group of associates who achieve above average performance, and those that achieve below average performance, they don't earn in, but the ones that do are the ones you want to retain for the long haul.
It's really important, that distinction. I'm really happy you went backwards and cleaned that up, because it's really important that people understand the concept. And thank you for saying that it's true. Yeah. It's earned equity for above average performance, because if it's given also, if the language is given, the guy doesn't feel important. Who cares? Oh, yeah, I sat in the same seat treating patients for 3 years. I got 5%. Bullshit. No, you were above and beyond, and you earned it. You set out and you hit the metrics. It's true. You actually robbed the person getting it as well when you treat it that way.
Yep. Completely agree.
So I think in summation, so it's obviously, like you're saying, Perrin, one of the hacks to retaining and attracting top talent is creating a culture and a framework that attracts A talent, right? Like, and think about, like, like you said, the cream is rising if the cream rises to the top, you have to have a pathway to keep those thoroughbreds and attracted to your rowing the boat with you kind of thing.
Yep.
So that's great.